Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We are continuing with our series, The Life and Teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov. Tonight, we are going to enter into a new phase of this series where we are going to start relating different Torahs, different teachings that the Ba'al Shem Tov gave over. Up to now, we reviewed his life. We have gone over some of the main tenets of Chassidut as proposed by the Ba'al Shem Tov, as initiated by the Ba'al Shem Tov, but they were very in general. And then last week before Shavuos, we reviewed the parallel or the connections between the Ba'al Shem Tov, who passed away on Shavuot, and David HaMelech, who passed away in Shavuot, and the main personality of Shavuot, who is Moshe. So we looked at the lives of the Ba'al Shem Tov, David HaMelech, and Moshe Rabbeinu, and saw tremendous parallels between them. Tonight, we're going to enter into a new phase of giving over specific Torahs that the Ba'al Shem Tov gave over. Now, he gave over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Torah. These are ones that I've picked out. I'm going to present them in no particular order, and each one stands on its own. These are individual Torahs. Many of them you may have heard of, or many you are aware of through other teachings of Chassidut, because ultimately all the teachings of Chassidut begin with the Ba'al Shem Tov. So where we're going to start is I'm going to read the only written evidence we have from the Ba'al Shem Tov himself. As we've talked about, he did not write any books, and only towards the end of his life did he give permission for his teachings to be written down. And Baruch Hashem, they were written down. That we reviewed already. But this is a letter that he wrote to his brother-in-law, which is one of the most important foundations of Chassidut. The letter is not complete. This is more like an excerpt from the letter, but it has all the important parts. Now, we should remember that this letter was written to his brother-in-law, his wife's brother, who for approximately the first 15 years of the Ba'al Shem Tov's marriage to his sister, he was vehemently opposed to the marriage, and he thought the Ba'al Shem Tov a complete illiterate dunce. The Ba'al Shem Tov was so hidden, his brother-in-law had no idea who he really was. When the Ba'al Shem Tov revealed himself at age 36, so his brother-in-law, and this is tremendously to his credit, really, felt shamed at the way he had treated his brother-in-law. And he actually became one of his top students, one of his top followers and supporters. So his name was Gershon of Kitov. Kitov was the town that he came from. And he himself was a great Talmid Chacham. So this is the letter that the Ba'al Shem Tov wrote to him. And as I said, it's the only actual written evidence or legacy we have from the Ba'al Shem Tov in his own words. So he says like this. This is in a letter that he wrote to him. On Rosh Hashanah of the year 5507, which is 1746 in the Common Era, I performed by means of an oath an elevation of soul, as known to you, and saw wondrous things I had never seen before. This was very common in Jewish mysticism, of deep mystical meditations that took the soul somewhat out of this world to transcend the body and to have very, very spiritual and mystical experiences. What I saw and learned there is impossible to convey in words, even face to face. I ascended from level to level until I entered the chamber of the Mashiach, where the Mashiach learns Torah with all the Tanaim and Tzadikim, and also with the 7 shepherds. In other words, the Ba'al Shem Tov was in a very, very elevated state of consciousness, really in a higher world. And he was in the chamber of the Mashiach. I'm continuing the letter. I asked the Mashiach, when will the master come? And he answered, by this you shall know, when your teaching will become public and revealed in the world, and your well springs burst forth to the farthest extremes, that which I have taught you and you have comprehended. And they also shall be able to perform unifications and elevations as you. Then all of the shells, the klipot, will cease to exist, and there shall be a time of goodwill and salvation. That's the first part of the letter. And here the Mashiach is putting it back on the Ba'al Shem Tov and revealing to him that the teachings that he has to share with the world, this is what will bring the Mashiach into the world. And these are he quotes from Tehillim, Vayafutzu ma'inatecha chutza, when the well springs of your teaching spread to the farthest reaches. Now, you should know that this, what's called Aliyat Neshama, happens 12 years after the Ba'al Shem Tov had revealed himself, and 14 years before he passes away. So in other words, we'll say like in the middle of his really beginning and establishing the Chassidic movement. The letter continues. I stood in wonder and great distress as to the length of time necessary for this. When could this be? But from what I learned there, 3 potent practices and 3 holy names, easy to learn and explain, my mind settled, and I thought that possibly by means of these, men of my nature will be able to achieve levels similar to mine. But I was not given permission all my life to reveal this. But this I may inform you, and may God help you. Your way shall ever be in the presence of God, and never leave your consciousness in the time of your prayer and study. Now, what comes now is the main reason why I am reading this letter, because in this letter, the Ba'al Shem Tov reveals one of his major teachings, and that's the one I wanted to start with. So that's why I'm reading the letter. So the letter continues. Every word of your lips intend to unite, for in every level there are worlds, souls, and divinity, and they ascend and connect and unify with each other. And afterwards, the letters connect and unify to become a word, and then unify in true unification in divinity. Include your soul with them in each and every state, and all the worlds unify as one and ascend to produce an intensely great joy and pleasure, as you can understand from the joy of groom and bride in miniature and physicality. how much more so in such an exalted level as this? Surely God will be your aid, and wherever you turn, you will succeed and reach great awareness. Give to the wise, and he will become even wiser. So this is the letter of the Ba'al Shem Tov. In it, he reveals really one major teaching, and that is that in every letter, there are worlds, souls, and divinity. So this I want to explain what this means. One second. The Ba'al Shem Tov is revealing, as in previous Kabbalistic teachings, that the Hebrew letters are the building blocks of creation. And in every letter, there are these three levels. The level of worlds, first of all, in Hebrew, it's called olamot, is worlds, nishamot are souls, and elokut is divinity. So each letter manifests in the physical world. In other words, the way that not just a Kabbalist, because we have in Pirkei Avot that God created the world through speech. Through the Hebrew letters, God created the world. So everything in the world is simply a manifestation or combination of Hebrew letters. And these Hebrew letters manifest in the physical world at the level of soul and as the means or the channel through which God uses to create and maintain the world. Now, many of you perhaps have seen Rav Ginsburg's book on the Hebrew letters. This is the basis of the book. The basis of the book is Rav Ginsburg goes through all 22 letters, and along with these three levels of worlds, souls, and divinity, we have the idea, and this is coming from the Sefer Yetzirah, that each letter has a form, a name, and a number. The Hebrew letters are pictograms. They tell a story. They're not just symbols of a sound, like A, B, C, D. Each letter is a form, it's a shape, and it tells a story and has tremendous significance. Each letter has a name. Aleph means something. Bet means something. Gimel, Dalet, etc. Each name has an energy and also is telling a story. And then we know that each letter has a numerical value. And so Rav Ginsburg puts these two teachings together, that each letter has a manifestation in worlds, souls, and divinity. And all three of those levels are manifest in the form, the name, and the number. You'll excuse me for a second. Oh, it's right here. So I'm just going to try to give you an example. This happens to be the Aleph. So here you could see that the top level, this is the form. And then it explains how the form of the letter Aleph manifests in the world, the physical material world, how it manifests in the experience of the soul, and what is its divine, godly energy that is used by God to create and maintain the world and reveal itself through the Torah. So that's the form. Then you have the name. The name Aleph, like I said, means something. That meaning is manifest in the physical material world on the level of the soul, especially the intellectual, emotional, behavioristic levels of the soul, and as a channel of God's will. And the same thing with number. Each number, the number 1, has a manifestation in the physical world. It has a meaning in the soul, and it has a meaning as pertains to God. Here, we cannot really go into the secrets of the Hebrew letters, but here's an example. This is a teaching from the Ba'al Shem Tov. The title of the book is The Hebrew Letters, the Channels of Creative Consciousness. I think you can see it here. By Rav Ginsburg. This has been reprinted many, many, many times. And I had the great privilege to assist Rav Ginsburg in writing this. This goes back to the years 1987 and 1988. That's when the book was written. And it was a tremendous privilege, let's say that. So that's the first idea here. And it's such a deep idea, especially everyone should have this book. This is one of the most classic books on the Hebrew letters ever written. I encourage everyone to get it. I'm sure it's on Amazon or the Galei Nai bookstore on their website. So that is coming directly from the Ba'al Shem Tov. The idea that every letter manifests in worlds, souls, and divinity. So this is like a ladder. These are the rungs on the ladder. And the significant thing is that the soul is in the middle. The soul is the connector between above and below, between God and the physical world. That is in a sense, the task of the soul, is to connect the upper spiritual worlds with the physical worlds. And that is, in a certain level, if we're talking about form, that is the form of the Aleph. This represents the upper worlds. This represents the lower worlds. And this is the soul and the Torah, which connects them together. These are the upper waters. These are the lower waters. And this is the firmament. This is the story of the second day of creation. Like I said, right now is not the time really to go into the details of the Hebrew letters. But when you learn this according to this model, then the idea that each letter is truly the building blocks of creation. When you understand how each letter manifests in the physical material world, how it is the animating force of the soul, and it is the means through which God creates and reveals himself in the world. So that's the first teaching from the Ba'al Shem Tov. As I said, we're going to now continue with individual teachings, and each one stands on its own. So the next one, and again, this is just the order that I jotted down my notes. Okay, since we just talked about a model of 3, world, souls, and divinity, there's another important model from the Ba'al Shem Tov. And this is a one particularly that Rav Ginsburg has picked up on and is used for 50 years of teaching. And that is from the Ba'al Shem Tov, that every process, and many of you have heard me teach this in different contexts many times, that every process goes through 3 stages. Hachna'a, Havdalah, and Hamtaka. Hachna'a means submission, Havdalah means separation, and Hamtaka means sweetening. So what did the Ba'al Shem Tov mean by this, and how is it practical? It's super practical. It is super practical. So we'll take a practical example of a person wanting to accomplish a certain task. That task could take a half an hour. It could take a day. It could take a month, a year, or 10 years. It doesn't matter. It's a process. And that process will go through 3 stages. The first stage is called submission, hachna'ah, where if we want to accomplish anything, from the smallest thing to the largest or the longest type of task, we have to submit our time, energy, and most importantly, our will to accomplish it. In other words, I think I want to do X, but unless I submit my will to accomplishing that, nothing gets done. So the first stage is always called submission, which has to do with decision, with applying our will. I am going to do this. The second stage is really by far the longest, and that's called separation, havdalah, the same word as the ceremony we do at the end of Shabbat, where we separate from Shabbat to the entering into the 6 days of the week. So here, separation means the mental, intellectual, emotional decisions that have to be made in order to accomplish something. In other words, I've submitted my will to do something. But now, every 5 minutes, I have to make decisions as to is what I'm doing right now and what I'm going to be doing in the next 5 minutes or 5 hours. Is this going to take me closer to accomplishing this task, or is it going to become a distraction? So in other words, the whole decision-making process, which is focused on accomplishing this matter, has to be accompanied by many, many decisions. And that's called separation. Separating between that which is efficient, which is helpful, which will get me closer to the goal, or those things that will distract me, will discourage me, will take me away from the goal. And then finally, we have the stage of hamtaka, sweetening. And this is, we could relate in 2 ways. First of all, I think we all know from small tasks to large tasks that many times we decide to do something and we put effort into it. Sometimes we put our heart and soul into it. Maybe we put a lot of money into it, whatever it is. And then we accomplish it. The question is, does that bring us satisfaction? In other words, sometimes we work very hard for a goal, and when we get there, it's like, yes, I did it, and I feel good about it, and I feel accomplishment. But other times we get to the goal and it's like, it's not really what I thought it would be. And I'm actually quite disappointed. I put all this effort and it didn't pan out. So the stage of hamtaka is to get to the goal and be satisfied with it, to feel fulfilled with it, and to have the feeling of an acknowledgement that, thank you, Hashem, for the opportunity I had to do this, for the help that you gave me. And I feel very satisfied, but I recognize it's all because of your help. That is a great sweetening. That is a great sweetening. So this process I have heard personally or read in Rob Ginsburg's books, he has used it hundreds of times to explain almost you name it. Any kind of process will go through these three stages. And it's very, very helpful that when we're about to embark on a new plan, idea, goal, to keep these three stages of the process in mind and to use them to actually accomplish what we want to accomplish and then be happy with what we actually do. Since we're on models of three, we're going to add one more from the Ba'al Shem Tov. And that is, and it was just the Haftorah, it was in the Haftorah for Shavuot, and that is the vision of Ezekiel, commonly referred to as Ma'aseh Merkavah, the workings of the chariot. The first chapter of Ezekiel, one of the most mystical chapters in the entire Tanakh. That was the Haftorah for Shavuot, because the experience in Shavuot was a totally mystical, miraculous type of mass experience of the Jewish people. In that vision, he mentions a number of times seeing this energy he called Chashmal. Chashmal, Rav Ginsburg says, is the most mysterious word in the Tanakh and the most paradoxical. Because Chashmal, the first syllable, Chash, means silent, and the second means speaking, mal. A word in Hebrew is called milah. So it's the speaking silence, the sounds of silence. It's a very paradoxical idea. So what did the Ba'al Shem Tov add to this? What he added was that any time that you have opposites, and Chashmal just happens to be what we would call the archetypal model of opposites, silence and speech simultaneously. And so anytime, according to the Ba'al Shem Tov, you have opposites, there will always be a middle intermediary stage or link that will link to the two opposites and will create a synergy between them. This we see very clearly in the Sfirot, where you have the right column, which is, we'll call it the column of Chesed, you have the left column of Gevura, but then you have the middle column that unifies the opposites. And so the Ba'al Shem Tov just took that idea and he applied it to Chashmal. And he said we could really read it Chash Mal Mal. Why two mals? Because mal actually has two meanings. One, chash, means silent. The second one is from Brit Milah, the covenant, the circumcision. And so, because mal has two meanings, he taught, read it chash mal mal. In other words, all opposites, we want to identify a middle unifying force that will bring them together. Now, what's interesting here is that these two models of Hachna'ah, Havdalah, and Hamtakah, submission, Havdalah, and sweetening, follows almost exactly Chash Mal Mal. Chash, silence, means there's a deep connection with submission. That we don't make a big deal of everything that we're about to do. We just make a decision and we do it. Most of it is happening silently. So Mal is very connected, silence to submission. Separation, Havdalah, is connected to Milah. The idea of Brit Milah is you're cutting off the foreskin. You're making a separation, literally cutting it away to reveal the male organ. So this cutting away, you're separating what's called the klipa, the shells. And the Ba'al Shem Tov mentioned that in the letter. The idea of transcending the shells of this world. This world is, the physical material world is covered with many, many klipot, many shells and obstacles. And then the sweetening is the second mal, is the speaking, the freedom of expression. That is the sweetening. So this is a very, very important teaching of the Ba'al Shem Tov, especially this idea that all opposites we should try to identify and try to mentally kind of like figure out how to bring opposites together. What's their common middle ground that we could bring them together? And of course, this is the secret of the Sfirot. So in all of the teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov, he takes very, very Kabbalistic teachings and he tries to translate it into different models and processes and examples that we can incorporate in our own lives. Chaim, Chaim. The next teaching is a well-known teaching from the Ba'al Shem Tov that, first of all, I should just mention that some of the teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov were repeated, added on to, morphed within the Chassidic movement. Many of the other teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov became very universal and entered into the mainstream of Jewish thought. So the Ba'al Shem Tov says the following about a statement in the Gemara. In the Gemara, there's a discussion about what's called mazal. Mazal, we know the famous term mazal tov, which we usually translate as congregation. Whoa. Whoa. I'm having a senior moment here. Here's my wife. She's always helping me. Congratulations. I got it mixed up with congregations. So that's how we usually translate mazal tov. But literally, mazal is connected to the what are called the mazalot, the astrological signs, the planets, astrology. That's literally what it means. Mazal tov means the stars should be with you. You should have good fortune in connection with the stars. So this brings us, or it could bring us to a whole discussion of Judaism and astrology. I'm not going to go to that place right now, but I'll just mention in short, the Gemara is full of discussions that treat astrology in a positive way. In other words, there was a recognition to this day that there is something about the energy of the constellations, of the stars, and their influence upon us. Just an example is the human body is made up of 90% water. Every cell is 90% water. We know, for example, the physical, material influence that the moon has on the tides. It's real. In other words, whether we call it the moon or we call it gravity, however we talk about it, the moon, depending on what position is in the sky, will influence the tides. But since the human being is made up of water, there's a connection to an influence on a human being also. And so the Talmud recognizes that there are influences from the stars. What is forbidden in Judaism is to treat astrology as a means of establishing the future or establishing one's actions and using it in a magical sorcery kind of way. That is forbidden. But to understand that there is an influence is considered not just permissible, it's realistic, it's part of reality. Nonetheless, in this discussion, the sages say, Ein mazal liyisrael. There is no definitive influence of the stars on the Jewish soul. So what do they mean by that? What it means by that is that even if the stars have an influence, it's not deterministic, and it is not final, and it is not something that we should base our lives on. We are ein mazalis. There's no influence from the stars because we can transcend through good deeds, prayer, charity, thought, connection to God. We can transcend any of those physical, material influences. So the Ba'al Shem Tov added something to this. He just read it literally. Ein mazal Yisrael. Well, ein, we could read it as part of the term Ein Sof, the infinite one. Ein means the infinite nothingness from which all somethingness comes from. So the Ba'al Shem Tov read it not in the negative. There is no mazal to Israel. He reads it, the Ein Sof is the mazal of Israel. That is the influence. That is the determining factor that influences a Jewish soul. So it's a very well-known teaching from the Ba'al Shem Tov. Ein mazal Yisrael, he reads it, the Ein, this is the mazal of Israel. Now the next one became extremely important in the development of Kabbalah. We've discussed many, many times the Arizal's Kabbalistic cosmology for explaining how this world came into being. And that is through the concept called Tzimtzum, contraction, where the Arizal explains that when the infinite God, before time, before space, before anything, only the infinite presence of God existed. And now God wants to create a finite world. The question is, well, where will the finite world go? If everything is part of the infinite oneness of God, how can you have something other than God, something seemingly independent of God? And so the Ari explains that God contracted his infinite being, this is what's called the Tzimtzum, the contraction, and created it's called Chalal Panui, a empty, open space where the finite worlds could be created. So that was the teaching from the Arizal. When the Arizal passed away, we have to remember, he was only in Sfat for 2 years and 6 months, or 2 years and 9 months, one of the two, less than 3 years, which is an astounding thing because we quote the Arizal all over the place. And yet all of those teachings were given over in less than 3 years. His main student was Rabbi Chaim Vital. He had approximately 20 other students, but it was primarily Rabbi Chaim Vital that the Ari gave over his deeper teachings. After he passed away, Rabbi Chaim Vital tried to collect all the notebooks, all of the notes that the different students had taken, because he felt he was the only one who had at least the most complete understanding of the Arizal. And it took him 20 years. And finally, it was actually his son who finally published what we now call as the Kitvei Ari, the writings of the Ari that are divided into 8 volumes. And many times in the Kitvei Ari, Rabbi Chaim Vital admits that he gives over a certain teaching, and he admits that he didn't fully understand it, or he didn't hear the end of the teaching, or he wasn't privileged to have the complete idea. But nonetheless, we would know very little about the Arizal if it wasn't for Rabbi Chaim Vital. So this is in no way a criticism. But what happened is that at a certain point, it became unclear exactly what the Arizal meant by the Tzimtzum. And so the debate was the Tzimtzum kipshuto, meaning that God actually did completely remove himself from this empty space and then reintroduced through what's called the Kav, the infinite light of God that would now create the finite worlds. Or was the Tzimtzum lo kipshuto, not literal? Not literal. It was more a figurative, metaphoric paradigm in which to understand the creative process. There was a very, very strong debate, and the implications are enormous between which side you take, because the side that says that it was kipshuto, that it was quite literal, implied that in this world there are things and places and situations that do not have a godly presence. In other words, the whole premise of the creation was creating a space that God was not present, and that had an effect. And of course, that's where evil comes from. But those who consider it lo kipshuto means that even in this so-called empty space, there was what was called a reshimu, an impression, and that it wasn't truly empty, because the Zohar teaches in many different ways that there is no such thing as a place void of God's presence. It would be oxymoronic. The Ba'al Shem Tov was a very, very strong advocate of Tzimtzum lo kipshuto, that it should not be taken literally. And there is no such thing, even evil, not that God, chas v'sholom, creates evil. We actually have a principle that no evil comes from God. But what does come is the possibility of evil. And that is to maintain what we call free will and to give human beings the opportunity to earn their status as an image of God. So this is a very, very important teaching of the Ba'al Shem Tov, which in almost all cases was adopted within Kabbalistic and philosophical circles. So this was a great contribution from the Ba'al Shem Tov, that he took a very strong stand that the Arizal's true meaning was there is no place, even in the contraction, that did not have an impression of God's energy, God's presence. The next idea is, and I say we only have time for another one or two. Okay, so I'm going to do two quickly. One is this idea, person is where their thoughts are. A person is where their thoughts are. And this is very practical, because it's very, very possible that half the people listening to me right now, their minds are actually in another place altogether. I don't know if this is actually true, but we know it about ourselves. We know it very well that whether we're at work or we're learning or we're doing a project or whatever we're doing, so many times our minds are someplace else. So the Ba'al Shem Tov just said very simply that we should have the awareness you are where your thoughts are. And then he adds to this idea of think good and it will be good. So this is a very, very common term in modern psychology. These two ideas come together in the 60s. There was this idea of be here now, this idea of focusing where you are right now. Of course, meditation is it's an attempt to channel, to harness our thoughts to be focused instead of here, there, and everywhere. And this idea of think good and it will be good. So this is a fundamental idea in modern psychology. This idea that learning how to think in the positive, to look at ourselves in the positive, to look at our situations in life in the positive. And when we do that, it will be good. But if we see the world through dark glasses, through sadness, depression, low self-esteem, anger, jealousy, then that's how the world is going to appear to us. And then it's not a very friendly world at all. Not a friendly world at all. So the Ba'al Shem Tov was telling us two very important things. You are where your thoughts are. And so if you want to be in the present, you have to be in the present. You can't be daydreaming. You can't be coming up with all kinds of fantasies that to be here now, to be focused, and most important, to be positive. If you think good, it will be good. And as soon as we start thinking in negative terms, our heart will follow. And before we know it, the horses are racing, and we're off to the races of negativity. So we'll end with a blessing tonight, end with a blessing that we all learn, and it's not easy. It is a challenge to think good, and it will be good. It's a 24/7, even in our dreams. If we go to sleep disturbed, depressed, and sad, most likely our dreams will reflect this very strongly. So we should all be blessed to think good, and may it truly be good.